All right, after you have your data graphed, you need to move on to page 17 in your packet where you're going to be doing the data discussion for the elastic energy experiment. So as you can see, I have this pulled up. I took data on 2 rubber bands, and this one is your rubber band here. So on your graph, what I'm going to have you do is I want you to cross off where it says strong spring, and really we just did this drop with 2 rubber bands and took data on it. On the left side should be your rubber band, which is just a single rubber band. We already have a pre-made diagram set up here, so you can just see that a single rubber band with the same weight is going to stretch a lot further than a double rubber band. I am going to have you plot your data like this. So use the same scale that I used. And I actually want you to plot the 2 rubber bands there on your graph on page 17. So go ahead right now and pause this video so that you have time to graph this data. All right, so after you paused it, what I also want you to do is I want you to graph your data for a single rubber band. Likely the curve will fall below the curve for the 2 rubber bands. Go ahead, pause that now, and graph your data on that page as well. All right, good. So after you pause those, you're going to be looking down at the mathematical model. In this space here, you should add your mathematical model. So make sure you do that. This is the mathematical model that we found for the elastic energy of 2 rubber bands. So your next step is you are going to look at similarities and differences between the setups, between the graphs, and between the mathematical models. So go ahead and pause this for right now and hit your similarities and differences. All right, great. Now that you're done with similarities and differences and you've looked at the 2 graphs, I'm going to have you skip prediction 1 and 2 right now and move over to the back side. When you're on the back side here, there's a couple of figures. So you could imagine, I'm going to start with figure 2 actually. You could imagine when you stretch 2 springs versus 1 spring, the force is a lot harder to stretch. The other thing that you could do is you could compare a strong spring and a weak spring that are just hanging there. And we're going to do that on, I can show you that with this simulation here. So this simulation on the left side is a strong spring representing the 2 rubber bands, and on the right side is a weak spring just representing 1. And you can see if you hang the same amount of weight, the weak spring or the 1 rubber band stretches further. Okay. The other thing you see is if we do the experiment that we did in class where we started at the top and let it drop down, the strong rubber band only stretches so much, okay? And the weak rubber band, when we do the same drop, stretches much further, okay? Now these are storing the same amount of energy though, because the weight was 100 grams that was there, and so they're storing about the same amount of energy. So what I'm going to have you do is you need to move on to really trying to understand what the difference in the data is showing. So in a sentence and then trying to find a single word, what is the real world difference between the 2 setups that we did? How does this difference show up on the graph? So looking back on your graph on the last page. And then lastly, how does this difference show up in the mathematical model? Finally, when we're in this section is you need to write out your equation and using all words. So elastic energy is equal to some word times stretch squared, and this word here is kind of what you're trying to figure out what the difference is, what the a value means. And then finally, you're trying to add why does the pattern make sense. So like whenever we have a quadratic, there are two things that affect it. So in this case, two things are affecting elastic energy to make it quadratic. Lastly, I'm going to have you move on to these two and specifically focus on the bottom because we're going to be using this for a bungee jump. So looking at a strong spring versus a weak spring, how is that going to cause different outcomes on your bungee jump? All right, so there should be one more video after this, kind of walking you through. Just make sure after you're done with this video that you have completed page 17 front and back.